for the presentation titled Usability Testing in Product Development. Welcome to the stage, Wiktor Pawlik.
Thank you, Kuba. Thank you for the introduction. Quite something. So, guys, today I will be actually talking about the usability testing in product development. Why this topic is because actually now a little bit something to change from the technical part, actually now focus a little bit on the user. So I hopefully imagine that this will be something quite of interest to more of the business savvy people who are on the audience. So let's start with first thing. So do we even need it, right? The usability testing. Do you actually even need to test out something with the users? I think for this, I have like a small video that I actually know found out a couple of years ago that I think nails a little bit the part of do we need this? Because it was titled, we don't need to actually test our users. We know what the users will do with our product. And the best guy is about to come here. Yeah. There he goes. So, yes. So let's assume that we do actually need to test our product with the users. So before I'm going to actually jump to how we can actually test the stuff with the users, I'm going to give a little bit of the context for the sake of the presentation. So let's say that we are actually now in the middle of the development. So the product is not live yet. That we are also actually now having already some specific solution, and we would like to, of course, test the solution. And what's most important, we would like to get some actionable insights from this testing so that we can actually improve upon this when we're going to be developing the product. Why this specific context? Because to be honest with you, this context is actually now most of our job at product design team, because we usually actually now work on the product that we are supporting our clients with end-to-end solution, and we are actually usually building the product from scratch. So this scenario is very typical to what we are actually doing within our team. So how it really goes when someone actually now thinks about, well, let's try and actually now test something with, test our solution with the end users. Well, we tend to do mistakes. So mistake number one is that we are usually actually testing the solution with the people nearby, which means that we are testing with the solution with the people who are not the actual end users. We are sometimes actually referring to our peers, to our colleagues. Sometimes we are actually now testing this from other people from the product development who are again biased, which is actually becoming a real problem when you want to actually test out the software with people who actually most probably gonna pay for this software, right? I mean, who's gonna actually use, who's gonna become the user. So paying users, this is what we are aiming for. And if we are actually targeting and testing and asking for opinions, people who are not the end users, not the people who will be actually paying for the product, then this might be a little bit problem because we might get actually the wrong feedback, right? Second mistake is that we usually ask user what they think about the solution, about the product, which again, mistake, because from my own experience, we usually tend to deal with one of two different type of people when we're gonna ask this question. So what do you think about the product? I call them the expert and the good auntie. The first one is actually, a person who, when asked about what they think about the product, he's gonna make this as almost like a live goal to give you feedback. I mean, you ask him, he feels in this case important, so he will try to be very, very helpful. Helpful, which is actually usually sometimes a little bit problematic because it feels like it's the most important thing for him. So he will try to actually give you some feedback, but this feedback might not be actually valuable because he will make it, like, as I mentioned, like a live goal to provide you with something. He will come up with some additional ideas. He will come up with some additional insights, just talk whatever comes to his mind, which might be the issue. And the second person is the good auntie. And this is the person who most probably, does not want to offend you. This is especially important when, for example, you're gonna actually ask the people nearby what they think about your product. This is the person that when you're actually gonna present the product, she's gonna be like, "Ah, you developed this, you created this, you built this. It is great. I don't have anything to change. I wouldn't change a thing. It's perfect. I mean, she just doesn't want to actually offend you, right? We as a people are biased and usually actually withhold the truth when sharing our opinions. To sum up, what we do and what we actually think and what we are actually saying that we are doing are many different things. And the mistake number 3 is that we apply feedback like it's divinely revealed truth, which means that all of the user feedback, because it is user feedback, it is important, is going straight to the product backlog. It's already implemented in the next sprint because someone said that it is unusable. Someone said that he doesn't like actually this particular part of the product. He doesn't like how actually you have to navigate through the platform. So it already goes towards the implementation, and we are already implementing this, which again comes to a point that actually not every feedback is valuable. And it actually requires a little bit of analysis whenever this feedback should be applied, right? So not everything that user said means that should be actually within our product. So what to do in this case, right? Because those are the typical scenarios, and that's from my experience we can actually encounter. So what to do? Well, there are actually a lot of different research methods that you can actually apply within your work when working on the product. As I mentioned, to remind you the context for this presentation, we are dealing with the product that is not live yet. So we won't be able to actually test out some of the solutions. Plus, we would like to actually get feedback that is related to how the user will be actually using the product, not what they just will think about the product. So let's first of all get rid of all the attitudinal feedback, and that is related to actually a little bit of the opinions. Then, as I mentioned, the product is not live yet, right? So we cannot actually do the research method in the natural use of the product because of the fact it's not finished. You'll have to most probably rely on the a little bit scripted use of the product, because we'll be, for example, testing like one part of the product itself. So let's get rid of all of the natural use of the product. And for the last part, let's get rid of a couple of additional things that, for example, require sophisticated equipment just for the sake of the presentation, so like eye tracking, or cannot be done in stealth mode, because, as I mentioned, we are building product is not live yet, and we would like to actually have this tested out with, for example, users that sign the NDA, so it doesn't actually go publicly wide the product yet, which means that we end up actually with in this case, moderated usability studies. And this is something that I would like to actually talk a little bit more about. So the moderated usability studies are actually quite good for this because, first of all, they are scripted. So we can actually test out like one specific part of the product, one specific feature, one specific functionality, something that is, for example, not live yet, something that is don't have yet the whole data. We can actually feed this with the mock data. So meaning everything that we can just test in a little bit lab specific environment, right? Then, second one, it is behavioral. So we are actually observing people, what they're doing, instead of just asking a question about what they're thinking about the product, right? Because as I mentioned, what people do and what people say they do, totally two different things. And we want to make sure that, for example, the navigation that we created within the product will be actually usable for the user, that will be able to actually, find themselves within the architecture, information architecture. Or, for example, they will actually understand how to use a specific feature, right? So it's not about actually asking them whenever they know. It's about actually so let's do something and then observe them and then actually figure it out if they actually know, right? And then, above all, it's qualitative, meaning that it's actually most probably gonna go with the direct approach. So we can actually, sign the NDA, for example, with people that are actually gonna be testing our products. We might be able to actually use, for example, our network of already potential clients that we have signed, or actually, use somebody from the recruitment agency network that's gonna fit our user personas, let's say, right? And the last one, those moderated usability studies can be done in person and can be done remotely. So to sum up, the moderated usability studies are basically one-on-one with a researcher, where we're actually giving a set of scenarios that lead to the task and usage of specific interest within the product or service by the definition. So which means that we will be able to actually test something that is scripted, that is controlled by us, and we can get the most actually valuable feedback because it's gonna be by the observation of what the user is actually doing within the product. Next, as for the moderating techniques, because as I mentioned, we are talking about the moderated usability studies. So there are a couple of different moderating techniques that we can actually use for the sake of testing our product and testing its usability. So one of those methods, for example, concurrent think aloud, which means that we are actually asking user to talk about what they are doing while they are doing this. The whole idea is about actually keeping a running stream of consciousness as they work, right? So people are actually having given the scenarios, they are trying to perform some specific tasks, but we encourage them to express already what they are doing. Because in this case, they might say that, well, I would like to actually for example, search for this specific part. This is something that they're saying, and we can already see if this is actually the right thing in the application that they are doing, meaning that they are actually, their actions corresponds with their intents. Different moderating technique could be actually in retrospective think aloud, which is again a little bit about getting the information from the user what they were trying to do, but afterwards. So we run actually the whole usability study, giving them specific scenarios. They are just performing those. They are performing those tasks, and then afterwards we can actually replay the videos of what they were doing in order to actually ask about specific for them to tell us what they were actually doing at this part, right? So again, same thing. They're actually expressing their intents and actions with words, while actually watching the video of them doing this. So we are actually getting the same part, but just afterwards. And there are like additional part like concurrent probing and retrospective probing, which again goes towards when during the studies and of course afterwards the studies. But the difference is that we are actually gonna ask the participants where something interesting happens. So actually having like the follow-up questions, trying to actually understand what is going on right now without trying to actually interrupt their work with them trying to actually explain what they are doing. So it's just about asking them if something interesting happens. What is important for actually choosing the right technique is that we have to figure out, of course, what's gonna be the intent of our testing. So to just give you an example, if we were to actually have like the qualitative information about the overall usage of the product and have more in-depth understanding of how the user were performing some specific actions, then we should actually have this while they are doing this, right? Because it's fresh, so they can actually already like share some insights while they are doing this. You can ask follow-up questions and we can dive deeply into specific elements, specific topics what are happening. But on the other hand, if you were to actually test out, for example, the usability in a form where the most important part is gonna be measuring the task on time, then of course we cannot ask them to try explain what they are doing. We cannot interrupt them while they are doing the task with additional questions. So that's why actually doing this as a retrospective part. So we can actually measure the time of the task spent, for example, for using one specific functionality, and then have a follow-up to understand what happened, what was the issues. So the second part of the presentation, a little bit on how to actually do it. Because we know that for this specific context, for this specific scenario that we are dealing with, which is, again, product not being live yet, we have some solution, we like to test this solution. We decided that actually moderated usability studies are gonna be a way to go. So how to do it? Well, there are a couple of elements that we have to actually figured out while actually planning usability test. So let's start with the one, which is the scope, which is quite obvious. So basically what to test. So what we'll be testing, right? So first of all, to actually figured out what we want to test in terms of the product itself. Is it gonna be already like a developed part of the product, which is kind of like in line with actually agile methodologies of developing the product, because we usually have like reusable parts of the product that we could actually test out, right? So we can actually perform the usability studies on the actual developed product, at least on those specific functionalities that's been already developed. Or maybe you'd like to actually test out, for example, a prototype that we could actually build a prototype for specific solution that we are actually having in mind. This could be like developed prototype. This could be actually created a prototype with rapid prototyping tools. So basically, just figured out what we will be testing. Then the second part, I think that the most important is the purpose. So again, why we are testing this, right? What we want to validate, why we want to validate. Do we have like any hypothesis that we would actually test with the users, right? So this basically gives us a setting for the scenarios that we're gonna be building for the usability studies. Next part, schedule allocation, something really, really important, trust me. So basically answering the question when and where the test will happen, right? In case that we are actually running the in-person moderated tests, then this is actually really important to figure out actually the specific location, the specific venue that we're going to be using for the usability testing, right? This might be special lab with Venice Mirror that we can actually observe the users while they are doing this. But on the other hand, we could also like perform the remote usability testing, where there are like a lot of additional tools that we already can actually quite successfully use, because they retrace every aspect of actually moderated usability testing by giving access to the platform for the user with a scenario being displayed on the same screen, and also having like a video conference call with the moderator. On the other hand, moderator can actually again observe the user, observe what he's doing on the screen, and provide him with additional questions whenever needed. And on top of this, we can actually add all of the observators. So observators who could actually, for example, be, of course, like someone from the product development teams, some designer, maybe some stakeholders. So basically anybody who will be actually interested to observe those studies. The next part, sessions. So the session is actually the usability study that is performed with one person. So first of all, how long is going to be the session? Usually the sessions for the usability studies should last around 1 to 1.5 hours. For example, 1.5 hours where we're going to have the session. This is a good thing to actually have, for example, 60 minutes for performing the usability studies, including, of course, with the introduction to the studies itself for the participant, to actually guide him what he will be doing, how he will be doing this, and providing him with a set of the scenarios, and then reserve, for example, additional 30 minutes for follow-up questions or maybe in-depth interview, so that we can actually dive even deeper into what's been happening, right? Plus, what is very important is to actually plan again the break between the sessions. If you were to actually for example, have 4 sessions during one day, then we need some time to reset the equipment, reset the scenarios, for example, clean up the database from the product, or maybe actually reload the prototype, and of course, plan ahead that people might be a little bit late. Next part, equipment. And as I mentioned, so first of all, depending on whenever you are running the in-person studies that are happening at a specific location, or maybe actually doing those remotely, we need to actually have some kind of a software. So for example, in-person studies, we can use like very sophisticated software that is TechSmith Moray, or maybe even something simpler, Camtasia, or maybe actually even something even simpler. So basically something that can just record the screen that the user is actually performing the task on, and also to actually record his face, so that we can actually read a little bit the emotions from the test. It might be simple as actually using like an open source platform, OBS, that streamers are actually using for streaming their games, which is something that I actually even used at one specific point of while performing disability studies, because it seems like the right fit, because we are able to actually record both the screen that's happening, both the user, and also even stream it to the client who was actually in a separate room just watching this, because we didn't have like any specific lab that we could actually run the usability studies. But what is important also with having like an in-person studies that are happening on a specific venue is to have like an internet. I mean, quite obvious, but it is. And this actually reminds me, like, I mean, this happens to like a friend of mine who was actually running the usability studies where they went to specific location to the client's office in order to actually perform those lab studies, and they found out that there was actually no internet connection because of the reasons. And our client actually really wanted to observe those studies. What we didn't want to do is actually to have the client within the room because it might affect a little bit the study itself. So what they were actually doing, they were actually drilling the hole between the walls in order to actually to have additional HDMI cable to just show what is happening on the screen for the clients being in the other room, right? So now participants, another element of actually planning the usability study. So the biggest, I think, part is always actually recruitment of the participants, right? In terms of actually products that are, for example, B2B, this is quite easy, I would say, because we usually actually tend to work with the products that have already clients, or potential clients. And because, the product is actually rated to the B2B market, we usually tend to have like more close relationships with those type of users. So we can actually, easily arrange a contact between those, between our end users to run the usability studies, right? And in terms of the B2C, we can always actually use a network of recruitment agencies that are across the globe that can actually recruit the users from the whole globe. For example, UX Alliance that have set up like a recruitment agency on all of the continents, and they can actually help us, for example, perform the usability studies on in every single country that is in the world, right? What is important though is again to find out that we are actually dealing with the right end users. This again to actually to share a little bit of the story, and that I had a chance to actually to get from again different colleague of mine when they're actually running the usability testing, is something very simple, but actually I'm with that at some point. They were actually building the software for CEOs. It was like a application that allowed them to gather all of the reports, to actually figure it out what is happening with the cash flow, basically all the stuff that actually is really important to CEOs. What's the part is that actually through this software they will have to actually generate some reports that were then sent to the shareholders. So upon actually getting to the office and actually being prepared to run the test with the CEO, what turns out is that actually the CEO never used the software and will never use the software because he has a secretary who does this stuff for him, right? So important actually figured out who are the end users. Nearing the end, the scenarios. So again, figured out what and how you actually test the software, right? So creating the scenarios that will allow us to actually to figure it out which part of the software we'll be testing, what kind of interactions that we would like to actually validate. So this might consist of different type of tasks. For example, open and close questions, right? So open tasks can be achieved in several ways, meaning that we are actually gonna let the user do their thing and observe the spontaneous behavior that's happening. Or maybe we would like to actually have like a really closed task, meaning that there's only one way to do it, and we would like to figure it out what is the success rate of actually performing this task, right? Also, again, we might have like a direct tasks within our usability study, which is saying basically find this. So there's a phrase, you need to actually find this, and just like a very simple task that users just need to perform. Or maybe actually scenario-based task, which is imagine a situation where you would like to do something and something. So, and please now use the software in order to actually to perform this specific task. Now, the last part, not the last part, almost the last part, metrics. I mean, as I mentioned again, we would like to get some actionable insights, so we need to figure it out what are the metrics for the testing, right? So this could be, for example, like a successful completion rates. This could be actually error rates within the software, so that we can actually this is like the quantitative data that we can actually measure. Time spent on the task. This is, for example, like very, very important when we are actually performing the usability studies for the product that are, let's say, for example, like for the internal use, right? So they're not generating money, they're actually cost-based products. So what's going to be the most important part is how they're going to affect the efficiency, for example, of the employees, right? So the time on the task, whenever this software will be actually improving, the time they're spending on specific task is important. So the metrics is something that we should actually always consider with it when planning the usability testing. And the last part are roles. So who will join the usability testing and what are the responsibilities, right? So first of all, there's always actually a need for the moderator because we are talking about the moderated usability studies. So this is actually quite obvious. And also to actually have like a, for example, researcher who can actually observe what is happening, take notes, and actually already get those actionable insights out of this. But this could happen afterwards, after performing the studies. And of course, for example, any observer that might be there important actually to see those studies. So somebody from the product management or actual designers who, for example, design the solution and they actually can get some insight from the real users. Or maybe you can actually just use the usability testing canvas and just figure out all the things on the fly because everybody loves canvases, right? So to actually answer all the questions to make sure that our usability test is going to be actually planned accordingly. So to sum up, usability testing will allow us to, first of all, of course, discover all of the user experience issues, usability issues. They will allow us to overcome the product bias, right? Because whenever we are actually involved in the product development, we are all biased. We don't know whenever the solutions that we are actually creating are good solutions, are the solutions that our end user will actually use. And it will provide a reality check for the product development team, right? So by performing the test, we will finally figure it out whenever this is actually valuable. But this happens only when done right. So testing with the actual users, observing their actions instead of just asking about their opinions, and of course analyzing the feedback before implementing the elements that comes out from the feedback. And that would be all. Thank you.
I think Wiktor could use a little bit more of that.
There is a trend of building a super app. Okay? Could you give us a bit of feedback? What aspects of usability should characterize this super app? Because obviously everyone wants to occupy the scene and the eye.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So super app. I think that this actually now goes towards like one specific question, but who are the users of the super app? Because something that actually I might enjoy it as a user experience might not be something that actually some other person will be enjoying. But it's all about actually figuring out what is the target group and making sure that it is a super app for this specific target group instead of trying to satisfy every single being in the world, right? So from my perspective, it is actually about the first point to making sure that we are actually now having the actual end users of our product, and then focusing on the usability. I would say usability because usability is more of a a little bit of the best practices that should be applied in any product, but focusing on the user experience for this specific group, and with understanding more about those users and actually now creating solutions that are according to the usability benchmarks are already okay, then we can actually focus on making sure that this is going to be a super app for those users. So the first level is making sure that the application is usable, which we can actually now run across just having the heuristic analysis, for example, for the benchmarks, then actually now going for the testing with the end users, just about whenever this is usable, so user does not feel lost, but then focusing on the actual end users, the one that we are targeting to perform usability studies, because that's where we're gonna get the feedback whenever this is gonna be a super app for them.
All right, thank you. And I think that will conclude the Q&A for this particular presentation. But remember, you can always talk with Wiktor after the presentation or during the gala. Are you going to be there?
Yeah.
He's going to be there. So, round of applause.